Welcome to another deep dive. And we love to get into some pretty fascinating topics here. Well, today we're taking on something maybe a little unexpected, might sound a little dry at first. We're diving into the world of bibliography.
And it's really fascinating stuff once you get into it. Most people, when they hear bibliography, they think, oh gosh, dusty old books, libraries, that kind of thing.
Right, exactly. It does have that connotation, doesn't it?
It really does.
But it's so much bigger than that, right?
Absolutely. And the thing is, it's all about information and the systems and structures we use to make sense of it all. Any kind of information, really.
I love that, yeah. And, to help us unpack all of this, to guide us through this surprisingly relevant world, we are turning to a book called Cats, Carpenters, and Accountants: Bibliographical Foundations of Information Science by Wayne Fremery. I mean, first of all...
What a title, right?
Yeah. Talk about an intriguing title. It definitely grabs your attention, but it's not just the title that's fascinating. Fremery himself has this really interesting background. He has degrees in economics, Korean literature, talk about a range.
Yeah, you don't see that every day.
Not at all, and it doesn't stop there. He also worked in construction and even ran his own publishing business, so he's coming at this from all these different angles.
And that really shines through in his writing. It's that unique perspective, those different experiences that allow him to connect these seemingly totally different fields, showing how these principles of bibliography, they're everywhere.
They're everywhere.
They underpin everything from, like you were saying, ancient texts to, get this, artificial intelligence.
That's what I'm excited to dig into. It's like, how does it all connect? So our mission today, what we really want to do is unearth the coolest, most insightful ideas from cats, carpenters, and accountants.
The nuggets, yeah.
Yes, the golden nuggets. And then, more importantly, what we always try to do is show you, our amazing listeners, why it all matters in your everyday life, right? It's about making those connections.
Exactly. Get ready to see information in a whole new light, because that's what I'm hoping for, at least. I know I'm already starting to. So let's jump right in, shall we?
Let's do it.
Okay, perfect. Now, Fremery, he starts off with a pretty bold statement right out of the gate.
Yeah.
He says, bibliography, it's not just about books. And like we were saying, it's so much more, but he takes it a step further.
He does.
He argues that it's about understanding texts as recorded forms. And I'll admit, that sounds a little jargony, right?
It's a mouthful.
It is. So what does that actually mean? What are texts as recorded forms, and how does that change how we think about this whole field of bibliography?
So it's about broadening our perspective, right? Text, it's not just, words on a page, a novel or something. It's anything that carries information, conveys meaning. Think like a map, a musical score, even a DNA sequence.
Oh, wow. I see what you're
Can be a piece of software.
Right, like code. Yeah,
right.
Exactly. And then recorded forms, that refers to how that information, whatever it is captured, how it's transmitted. It could be ink on paper, sure, but also bits on a hard drive, even neural pathways in the brain.
Oh, wow. So it's like the act of preserving and transmitting information regardless of the format.
Exactly. And that act of recording, of making copies, that's key.
That's key. How come?
Because that's how knowledge is built, right? Shared, passed down. Every copy, a medieval manuscript or a social media post.
It all leaves a trace.
It does. And it carries these traces of where it came from, the people who created it, the whole system it was created in.
Mm-hmm.
Fremery, he really emphasizes that.
It's making me think about even just hitting that retweet button. I'm part of this flow of information.
Exactly. You're copying it, transmitting it.
Yeah, it's all connected.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we've got this idea of texts as recorded forms, this flow of information. Fremery then takes it even further, right? He starts talking about this connection between literature and information science.
He does, and it's a fascinating one. He brings up this concept called chiasmus, which might sound a little intimidating.
Chiasmus. Okay, I'll be honest, not ringing a bell.
I figured. It's a literary device, involves this crisscross pattern of repeated ideas,
right,
like an ABA structure. Think about Kennedy's famous line, ask not what your country can do for your country. Ask what you can do for your country.
Okay, yeah, that's
chiasmus.
I see, so it's like a mirroring of ideas.
Exactly. And the thing is, Fremery points out that this chiasmus, this pattern, it pops up in information theory too, specifically in Claude Shannon's work. And Shannon, he's like the godfather of the digital age.
Right, I've heard the name, but I'm not...
Laid the groundwork for how we understand digital information.
So we've got this literary device showing up in the science of information. That's a curveball I wasn't expecting.
It really highlights how these fields that seem so separate, they're actually connected.
They're intertwined.
Exactly. They both grapple with how we organize, how we transmit knowledge.
That is fascinating. And this all leads to another key idea that Fremery brings up, right?
It does, and this one is something I think everyone can relate to, because we're talking about the power of lists.
Okay, lists. Now we're talking everyone loves a good list. I'm already on board.
Exactly. And Fremery, he uses lists in such a clever way throughout the book. It's not just, here's a list of key takeaways, although those are helpful.
Right, no shade on a good list of key takeaways.
Not at all. But he uses them to really show how we as humans make sense of the world. He argues that lists, they're more than just reminders to pick up milk.
Right, they're not just for groceries.
They're fundamental to how we categorize information, how we prioritize it.
So it's not just about what's on the list, it's the act of listing itself. That's such an interesting concept.
Right, and he illustrates this in a very unexpected way with a tick.
Wait, a tick? Like the bug?
The one and only.
Okay, I'm intrigued, but also slightly terrified. Where is this going?
It's not as scary as it sounds, I promise. He draws on the work of this biologist, Jakob von Uexküll, who studied the perception world of a tick.
Okay, a tick's perception world. I mean, I never thought about it, but I guess it makes sense. Everything experiences the world differently, right?
Exactly. And Uexküll's point was that even a creature as seemingly simple as a tick, it needs to select and prioritize information to survive. A tick, it's got this limited set of senses, right? So it focuses on specific things. The smell of butyric acid, the temperature of warm blood.
That's lovely.
Right, but that's its survival list. It's how it makes sense of the world, how it finds its next meal.
So even a tick has its own system of filtering its own information bubble in a way.
Precisely. And here's where it gets really interesting for us, for humans. Think about it. When you scroll through social media, read an article, even just chat with a friend.
We're bombarded with information constantly.
Yep, we are. And we're making choices, consciously or not, about what we pay attention to, what we deem important. You're creating your own perception world, just like the tick, based on your own internal list of priorities.
Wow, our own internal lists. That is a powerful way to think about it. We are all creating our own information bubbles, even if we don't realize it.
We are. And this idea of selecting, prioritizing, it leads us to another really crucial piece of the puzzle, which is the power of description. They really are powerful, right? Descriptions, I mean, because they really shape how we understand anything. You know, Fremery, he dives into how even descriptions that seem totally objective, like what you'd find in a library catalog, they're still influenced by the beliefs and biases of whoever created them.
That's something I never really thought about, to be honest. I always thought of library catalogs as like neutral tools, just a way to find a book. How can they reflect bias?
It's subtle, but it's definitely there. It's in the way a book is categorized, the keywords used to describe it, even just the order that information is presented, all of those little choices, they reflect a viewpoint. You know, like imagine a book about, say, the history of colonialism. It could be categorized under like exploration, or it could be under conquest. Very different feel, right?
Totally. The words we use to describe something, it really matters. It frames the whole thing. Is there like a specific example from the book that really illustrates this in like a really vivid way?
Oh, definitely. Fremery talks about the Archimedes palimpsest. It's this ancient text, originally written by Archimedes, the Greek mathematician, but then centuries later, scribes, they wrote prayers right over the top of it.
Oh, wow, yeah, I've heard of that. It's like a historical mystery, right? With one text hidden beneath another. But what does that have to do with descriptions?
Well, think about it this way. Our understanding of this document, it's changed over time, right? And those changes, they're all tied to how it's described and the tools people had to even, like, read it. For centuries, it was just a prayer book. That's all anyone knew. Then, in the early 1900s, scholars used ultraviolet light, and boom, they could see these faint traces of Archimedes' original work underneath.
Wow, so the description literally changed from prayer book to lost work of Archimedes. Talk about a plot twist.
Right, and it didn't stop there. More recently, even more advanced imaging like digital enhancement is revealed even more of Archimedes' writing. So each new way of describing it, from the scribe in the 10th century to like a scientist with a high-powered scanner today, it shapes how we understand this document and its importance.
That is mind-blowing. It shows how even our understanding of history is shaped by the tools and the perspectives of the present. It's like we're always looking through a lens, aren't we? But, okay, getting back to Fremery, he doesn't just stop at library catalogs and ancient texts. He argues that even, like, scientific disciplines, bibliography itself included, they've been shaped by ideas from other fields, particularly biology.
Absolutely. He talks about how in the early 20th century, there was this huge boom in evolutionary theory.
Yeah.
It was revolutionizing biology. And bibliographers, they were really influenced by this. They started to see books kind of like living things almost, like books as evolving organisms with their own family trees and everything.
That is so interesting. So they were taking these concepts of like natural selection, adaptation, and applying them to the world of books.
Exactly.
Did that lead to any big changes in how they actually approached the field, how they did bibliography?
It sparked some pretty intense debates, like really heated arguments. Fremery introduces us to some of the big names in the field at the time. Henry Bradshaw, Steve DeGansley, Walter Gregg. Each of them, they have their own take on how these evolutionary principles applied to bibliography, and these differences, they reflected bigger questions about, like, the nature of knowledge itself.
So it became more than just about books. It was about how we categorize and understand the world.
Exactly.
Wow. Did they ever come to any conclusions, or were they just arguing about this forever?
Well, those specific debates, they've kind of faded, but the underlying question, it's still so relevant today. Like, how do we create systems of knowledge, ways of organizing information that are both comprehensive but also, like, fair, unbiased? And that's where Fremery connects this historical debate to something really crucial. Just like biological classifications, they can be flawed, right? Could even be harmful, reinforcing stereotypes. The same thing can happen with information hierarchies.
You're talking about like library catalogs, online databases, even how search engines work, all those systems we use to find information.
Exactly. And Fremery, he wants us to think critically about those systems. Who's deciding what categories to use, what gets prioritized, and what ends up hidden, buried? Those decisions, they have real consequences for how we see the world.
It's like he's urging us to like look beyond the surface, to question the systems that we rely on for information. And this isn't just some abstract academic thing, right? It's relevant to all of us, especially now in this increasingly digital world.
You got it. And that actually brings us to why this deep dive matters so much. Because Fremery, he makes the case that these principles of bibliography, they're more important now than ever in our age of big data, AI, machine learning, all of that.
Okay, I have to admit, that connection, it's not immediately obvious to me. We've gone from dusty old books to AI in like 5 minutes. How does it all fit together?
It might seem like a huge leap, but the core ideas, they're surprisingly similar. Think about it this way. A bibliographer, they carefully catalog and describe a book, right? Data scientists, they create these complex models to organize and understand huge amounts of data.
So those algorithms that seem so mysterious are actually just like really advanced forms of bibliographical description?
Exactly. They're both systems for classification and interpretation.
Yeah.
It's all about making sense of information, whether it's on a printed page or stored in a massive data center.
Okay, that actually helps a lot. It's clicking now. But I guess my question is, why should I, as like a regular person, care about these complex data models? They just seem so removed from my everyday life.
Because those models, they have a huge impact on your life, whether you realize it or not. I'm talking about Google Maps recommending a route, Spotify telling you what to listen to, even dating apps showing you potential matches. That's all driven by algorithms using tons of data to basically predict your behavior and shape your experiences.
Okay, you're right. When you put it that way, I hadn't thought of it like that. But are you saying there's a direct line between those algorithms and like the concepts of bibliography that Fremery's talking about?
Absolutely. And that's where things get really interesting. The book, it digs into how machine learning, which is behind a lot of these algorithms, it's basically automating the process of bibliographical description.
Wait, so machines can do bibliography now? That's both kind of cool and kind of terrifying at the same time.
It's not quite machines taking over just yet.
Yeah.
But those machine learning algorithms, they're trained on huge data sets, right? And they use that data to find patterns, make predictions, essentially create their own descriptions of the world based on what they've been fed.
So it's like they're developing their own systems of classification, just like the bibliographers Fremery talks about, but on a much bigger scale.
You got it. And here's the thing, just like any description, those data models, they can reflect biases. The biases of the people who created them, the data they're trained on, the priorities that are kind of baked into the algorithms themselves.
That is a little bit scary when you think about it. It's not just about the data, it's about how that data is interpreted, categorized by these incredibly powerful systems that, let's be honest, most of us don't really understand. It really makes you think, doesn't it? Like, who knew we'd go from these like dusty old books to the algorithms that are shaping our entire digital lives? And the thing is, they are connected, aren't they?
They really are. And that's exactly why Fremery argues that having this bibliographical mindset, it's so crucial, especially now. It's about looking at information, not just taking it at face value, but really questioning it, understanding how it got there.
So it's not enough to just be aware of the information itself. We have to understand, like, the whole system, the structures that shape how we even get that information in the first place.
Exactly. Like nothing exists in a vacuum, right?
Yeah.
Every piece of data, every description, even an algorithm, it's all a product of choices, of biases, of historical context. And if we can start to understand that, be aware of those things, we can be a lot smarter about the information we consume. Less likely to be manipulated or tricked.
That is so important, especially now when we're just bombarded with information from every direction. It can feel impossible to navigate sometimes. It's funny, we've been talking about this idea of cats, carpenters, and accountants, that whole metaphor from the book's title.
Right.
And we've talked about the cats, that observation, that careful description, and the carpenters, they build these systems, right?
Frameworks.
Exactly. But what about the accountants? Where do they fit into all of this?
The accountants. Fremery. He uses them to represent something that's super important but often overlooked. They're all about accuracy, details, that meticulous record keeping.
Right, like dotting your I's and crossing your T's.
Exactly. He's reminding us that even the tiniest details, they can have huge implications for how information is ultimately understood and used.
It's like every little piece of the puzzle matters. Every footnote, every single data point, it all contributes to the bigger picture.
It all adds up, yeah.
It really does. This whole conversation has been so eye-opening. I feel like you've given me a whole new set of tools, like a new lens for looking at information.
That's great to hear. And like we always say, this is just scratching the surface, right? Fremery's book, it goes so much deeper into all of this, the history, the evolution of these information systems, and honestly, the challenges we're all facing now in this age of digital everything. It's a lot.
Well, you've definitely convinced me to add it to my to-read list, that's for sure. I'm already feeling like I need to go back and reread my notes. But before we wrap up, I always like to leave our listeners with something to, chew on, something to think about. So if there's one big takeaway, one call to action from this whole deep dive, what would it be? What do you think?
I think it goes back to something we touched on earlier. The next time you encounter any piece of information, whether it's a news article, a social media post, even something like a product recommendation, take a second. Think like a bibliographer. Ask yourself, who created this? Why? What were their motivations? And what systems, what biases might have influenced how it was created? And how is this shaping my understanding of the world?
That is a powerful challenge. It's about moving from just passively consuming information to really engaging with it, thinking critically about it.
Exactly. And in a world that's just overflowing with information, that kind of critical thinking, it's more valuable than ever.
Could not agree more. Well, this has been an incredible deep dive, I have to say. Thank you so much for joining us and taking us on this journey into the surprisingly fascinating world of bibliography.
My pleasure.
And of course, a huge thank you to Wayne Fremery for giving us so much to think about. To our amazing listeners, thank you for tuning in as always. And remember, stay curious, keep asking those questions, and never stop exploring. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.